Today on Fear and Greed, global financial markets are in turmoil over Donald Trump's economic policy as China announces tariffs against the US in retaliation. The cost of living front and centre as federal parliament returns, and local sales of Tesla tumble. Plus, Westpac offers a year's free legal advice to entice small businesses to bank with them, and Australia's biggest glassmaker goes into administration. Welcome to Fear and Greed, daily business news for people who make their own decisions. It is Wednesday, the 5th of February, 2025. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, the main story this morning, Donald Trump diplomacy continues to rile financial markets, with the Aussie dollar bouncing yesterday and the local share market rebounding before falling away at the end of the day.
Do you remember Mad Comic and the guy that used to, Alfred E. Newman?
Yep.
And part of, and I remember he was running for mayor in the 1970s in New York City. Now, he wasn't literally running for mayor. Mad Comic had a character running for mayor, and his motto was a voice of indecision amidst all the uncertainty. And when you hear what's going on at the moment, there is so much uncertainty around the place, and an indecisive president, in as much as he changes his mind, makes it very, very difficult. It's hard to keep up because things are changing by the hour. But what we do know right now is that Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau both negotiated the postponement of the 25% tariff on imports from both nations, which the US had scheduled to kick in yesterday. We also know that Donald Trump has spoken to Ukraine, and he wants to access Ukrainian rare earths, which are used in electrification, in return for supporting the war effort against Russia. That suggests the US will continue to provide funds and equipment to Kyiv. We weren't sure that was going to happen. He's also signed an executive action to create a sovereign wealth fund for the US that might be used to facilitate the sale of TikTok. And, which is quite remarkable, you now have countries offering stuff to Donald Trump in the hope that it will prevent tariffs. An example, India. Its Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, he has cut duties on imports from textiles and motorcycles, and he's pledged to accept thousands of unlawful migrants from the US. He also said he'll maintain, or at least India will maintain, the US dollar as its trading currency. So you now have countries going to Donald Trump preemptively offering stuff.
So there's a lot of talk that Donald Trump would use these tariffs as essentially as a negotiating tactic and almost as a warning to other countries as well. Just based on what you're saying with India, it sounds as though that may be effective.
Absolutely. It's effective. 10,000 more National Guard troops on the Mexican border. The Canadian government also agreed to tighten rules around the border between Canada and the US. So the big sledgehammer is working somewhat.
Yeah, absolutely. What about China, though? Because tariffs due to come into effect overnight. That's the extra 10% that we've been talking about.
Yeah, and China's a totally different ballgame to any other country. It's the world's second biggest economy. Particularly around goods, less so services, but goods, think TVs, fridges, all that sort of stuff. Really important provider of products all around the world. Last night, the deadline for tariffs to be imposed came and went. China said that it will now impose, so came and went, so tariffs are in place, theoretically. China said it will impose retaliatory tariffs against the US. That will hit US imports of large engine cars, for example, trucks, coal, LNG, oil, agricultural machinery. So it looks like at this point, whenever I say this, it could change in the next hour. So it's really hard to be too definitive on any of this.
Yeah.
But at this point, those 10% tariffs are in play.
Yeah, this is essentially a snapshot of the situation as it is right at the moment of recording. And this is an entirely fluid situation, which seems strange to be talking about such major global events as being so fluid, and things like trade deals and things which take so long to negotiate. And here we have entire trade policies being rewritten in hours.
Yeah. Incredible.
It's extraordinary. So what's happened to financial markets as a result of the last 24 hours?
Well, confusion seems to be the most often used word. The sage advice from people is always look through the noise. problem is with Trump, you just don't know what's noise and what's not.
Hmm.
Oil prices dropped sharply yesterday after the postponement of tariffs on Canada. Copper prices, which is a good bellwether for the global outlook, they jumped. Gold is trading near record highs. Good place to put money in uncertain times. Gold, the Aussie dollar is back under 62 US cents. It bounced, but then it's come back again. Bad news for anyone traveling overseas, obviously. Crypto bounced big time. Bitcoin was up about 7% to about 100,000 US dollars a unit. Ethereum, which fell more than 20% 24 hours ago, was up 12% yesterday.
You have an interview coming up after the show, Sean, and you're speaking with Caroline Bowler from BTC Markets. And speaking of a snapshot in time, this was recorded yesterday afternoon, and really it is a reflection on kind of what lies ahead.
That's right. Yeah, and Caroline's very sensible, and she sort of said, with all this going on, the bottom line here is that Donald Trump will be much friendlier to digital assets and cryptocurrencies than the previous regime. And I think everyone agrees with that. And so she's certainly pushing to look through what's happening minute by minute at the moment and think about digital assets in that way. So it's a very timely chat given everything that's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. What about local markets? What's been the impact in the last 24 hours?
Well, yesterday we were talking about Monday's 2% drop. The market opened yesterday, the S&P ASX 200, took off, sort of recouping most of the losses. Then it just fell all day and finished actually lower, about 5 points lower to 8,374 points. Tech stocks were easily the best performers, mirrored Wall Street. Miners also rallied after hopes that Trump would speak to the Chinese government about tariffs. Energy companies fell back as oil prices dropped. Real estate investment trusts underperformed. I mean, what's uncertainty? I suppose that's how you have to describe our local market at the moment. Uncertain.
All right, Sean, we have plenty still to come. It just feels like such a
I'm
big
exhausted
start.
though, Michael.
I know it's such a massive start to the show, and really something like this, it does just suck all of the oxygen out of so much of what is going on. But there is still plenty to discuss. We've got to talk about the sales of Tesla vehicles. They have dropped sharply in Australia. Some good news for small business customers potentially looking for a good deal from a bank, and federal parliament back in session. That and plenty more. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, federal parliament was back in session yesterday, and there was some agreement. Plenty of disagreement, though, on day one of the new year. Everyone started at church, which is obviously
that's lovely.
It's the tradition, isn't it? And it's nice to see these traditions being upheld. Afterwards, there was agreement over the vile nature of anti-Semitism in Australia. Then there was disagreement over the government's handling of the current outbreak. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese obviously defended his handling of it, citing the creation of new offences and more funding for Holocaust education. Then you had opposition leader Peter Dutton saying that the Jewish community was paying the price for the lack of a strong stance against the anti-Israel protests since October 2023. It did not take long for the argy-bargy over this and such a massive issue to kick off.
What's interesting is that Peter Dutton and Anthony Albanese both had press conferences yesterday, and Peter Dutton focused on anti-Semitism. Anthony Albanese didn't. It's not an area where, it appears that he doesn't think he's going to make much ground there. In fact, his press conference was all about early childhood education policies. Then we had question time. There was a lot of discussion about lunch. Well, more specifically, the cost of Peter Dutton's promise to allow a tax deduction for small business lunches, which he made last month. Costings on that is somewhere between $2 billion and $10 billion, so the government went very hard on that. But, as you just said then, the anti-Semitism, which is a real problem, is certainly where the coalition is playing at the moment, and the government is staying away from it.
This next one, Sean, I find this really interesting. This feels like a bank being quite creative in what they're looking to do. Westpac is offering business customers a year's worth of basic legal services. Essentially, Westpac is looking to boost its small business portfolio, and this is something that they're looking to lure people with.
We were talking last week about the banks trying to lure deposits and boost that part of their business? Well, this is about the small business sector. National Australia Bank is the main small business banker in the country. It's got about 21% market share. Commonwealth Bank's done really well in this area. It's up to about 19%. Westpac is up to about 16%, but the fastest growing, and it makes about 30% of earnings from business banking nowadays. It has spent $10 million investing in a legal services provider, LawPath. It will now allow new customers 12 months worth of access to archives of legal documents and business registration services. Now, you and I run a small business. Business registration services are very valuable to get some help on that. So this is Westpac's way of thinking laterally about attracting customers and helping them with their legal advice.
Yeah, interesting idea. Woolworths boss Amanda Bardwell has restructured her management team as she looks to boost sales across the chain and particularly its home brand products.
She's created a position of managing director of Woolworths Retail. A woman called Annette Carantoni, who was previously chief supply officer, now has that gig. Ms. Carantoni will look after supermarkets, the red meat processing and supply business, that's known as Greenstock, the broader home brands operation, and grocery delivery company Milkrun. That is a massive portfolio for Ms. Carantoni. Woolies is under pressure at the moment. Late last year, it said it was heading for lower profits and it had to up discounting. Of course, there's regulatory pressure. The competition watchdog, the ACCC, is looking into pricing behaviour of both Woolies and Coles. There's pressure around its share price, down 16% over the last 12 months, certainly one of the worst of the large caps last year. So Amanda Bardwell, the CEO, is trying to take some action.
There's still a bit of other stuff going on. What corporate news have you been keeping an eye on, Sean?
A few highlights. SEEK's proposed acquisition of XREF for $42 million fell through. The shareholders of XREF didn't want to do the deal. New Farm's share price rose 4% after it said its previously announced cost-cutting program remains on track. Pro Medicus, one of the best stocks of last year, jumped 5% yesterday after the company signed a $53 million contract with US healthcare network Baycare to roll out its Visage diagnostic imaging platform. You know, Pro Medicus, one of the best last year. It's already up 12% this year. Yeah, incredible.
Not a bad start to the year. The same can't be said for Tesla sales,
No.
Sean. The sales of the Tesla EVs in Australia fell 33% last month, according to the Electric Vehicle Council.
So the Electric Vehicle Council said 739 Tesla models were sold in January compared to more than 1,100 12 months earlier. Polestar EVs also had a sales slide. They fell 45%, just 82 vehicles in January. That's a very bad start to this year. Mind you, last year was pretty good. EV sales exceeded 100,000 for the first time, or at least they're estimated to have exceeded 100,000 for the first time. About 9.5% market share. If you live in Canberra, you are more, how am I saying this, Michael? Canberra residents are the most likely to buy an electric vehicle. Tesla Model Y is the biggest seller. The good news is that public charging stations have doubled in the last 12 months. There are now over 1,000 fast charging sites nationwide, but the industry goal of reaching 50% of sales by 2030 looks a little bit optimistic.
My local shopping centre, Sean, has a massive bank of Tesla branded EV charging stations underneath. And it was a relatively new kind of development. And when they first did that about 5 years ago, I remember driving in going, what on earth why are they putting so many of these in? No one's ever going to use that many. And it was just empty. Now I drive through and every single spot is taken up with a Tesla charging. Yep. So you can see it happening and you can see the demand for these public charging stations.
It's really fascinating where they put them. So my local golf course has got EV charging stations. So all these places where you go for, 1, 2, 3 hours, they're really good spots for EV charging stations.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Amazing, Sean. I need to tell you about a story. It's out of New South Wales politics, right? But it's a story that is really pretty staggering, right? The New South Wales Transport Minister, Jo Halen, has resigned over what she called errors of judgment in her use of a taxpayer-funded driver. A little bit of background to this one. Over the weekend, and this has dominated headlines for a few days in New South Wales, over the weekend, Ms. Halen apologised and agreed to repay about $750 for a 446-kilometre, 13-hour round trip for a driver to come from Sydney to her holiday home, essentially on the central coast of New South Wales, and take her to lunch at a Hunter Valley winery over the Australia Day long weekend. Part of the big issue with that was not just the distance, but the fact that the driver had to travel from Sydney to this home at Caves Beach and then to the restaurant and wait for about 3 hours or so while this kind of lunch was taking place. Yesterday, it emerged that she'd taken a second trip to the Hunter Valley with her husband last year. Also, she's claimed to have used her driver entitlement to travel to the Blue Mountains for lunch with her chief of staff and from Caves Beach, which I mentioned, which is about 130 odd Ks north of Sydney to the city, including dropping her children at weekend sports games, all technically within the rules. But as she said across the weekend, it does not pass the pub test.
And it does not. Absolutely. I mean, she's no longer Transport Minister. She's not going to leave Parliament. Obviously been a problem for the Minns government. In fact, 24 hours ago, Chris Minns, the Premier, was actually backing her. But not surprising, she's no longer there, Michael.
No, not a huge surprise. Australia's largest glassmaker, Sean, I mentioned this at the top of the show, and the only maker of architectural glass, Oceania Glass, has been placed in administration less than a year after it successfully argued that China and Thailand were dumping cheap glass into the Australian market.
Grant Thornton has been installed as administrator of the Dandenong-based company and will continue to run it while they assess the state of the business. According to a report in The Australian, 250 people's jobs are at risk here. The company is owned by private equity investors Crescent Capital Partners. Now, last year, it successfully argued that Chinese and Thai competitors were dumping glass products onto the Australian market. Great history. This company, founded in 1856, claims to be the only architectural glass manufacturer in Australia. Anyway, post the dumping of that glass, it hasn't made it, or it looks like it may not make it. It may not make it. It's in administration.
Turning to international news now, and unsurprisingly returning to the US, Sean, Donald Trump says Elon Musk can't do anything without his approval. This all came about after the cost-cutting czar, Elon Musk. It's a great way to describe him, isn't it?
Yeah, it is
cost-cutting czar. He was accused of breaching the Constitution.
So the ex-owner and newly appointed head of the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, really caused ripples when he pledged to abolish the US Agency for International Development. He called it a criminal organisation. Representatives from Mr. Musk's organisation were granted access to secure treasury systems over the weekend, raising fears he could cut payments to state programs such as Medicaid that provides healthcare to millions of low-income Americans. It all got too much for Democratic legislators in the Senate. They wrote to the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, raising deep concerns about Mr. Musk's department accessing classified information and risking national security. Donald Trump's been under a bit of pressure on this one, and he appears to be trying to reel in Mr. Musk. Good luck with that. I quote, "We'll give him the approval when appropriate. When not appropriate, we won't." But he reports in.
How long do you reckon that relationship can survive? Like, it feels so fractious, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's not long.
No. Look, I'm interested in your take on this one, Sean. Apple has criticised a pornography app newly available on iPhones in the European Union, saying the bloc's digital policy was undermining consumer confidence in Apple. It's interesting because since it first opened the App Store on iPhones way back in 2008, Apple has always controlled what apps could be downloaded to the devices. In 2010, the then CEO Steve Jobs said that keeping porn off the iPhone was Apple's, quote, moral responsibility, and was one of the company's major motivations for acting as a gatekeeper. This is all according to Reuters. But in the EU, then, Apple's gatekeeper status changed with the 2022 adoption of the Digital Markets Act, or DMA, which is an acronym I frequently like to use, which required Apple to allow alternative app stores. And one of those stores, called Alt Store, has begun distributing an app. And here is the point, Sean. It is called Hot Tub, which, perhaps unsurprisingly, includes pornography.
I have nothing to say. Good story. Shows there's two sides to every story. It's not just about closing down the apple, sort of ensuring there's competition in the market. There's two sides to every story, Michael. Thanks.
There you go. That's
what was the name of the app? Hot Tub.
It's Hot Tub. Hot Tub,
Gosh.
Sean. Yeah. I enjoyed your deeply insightful take on the story. Just trying not to laugh at this one, weren't you?
The mirth I had as you were telling the story, and I was trying to get your eye to make you laugh. To be honest,
no, I was ignoring you.
You were focused. Well done.
I have done that to you so many times, where you are telling a story and you're talking about like the market bottoming or something like that, and I'm trying to make you laugh during it, and you've dodged me, and I dodged you successfully. So
well done.
Eat it. Up next is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Caroline Bowler from BTC Markets is your guest. And big news, Sean. Brace yourself.
I know. The newsletter is back.
The Fear and Greed newsletter is back today. You got me. You got me at last, Sean. I've been trying to ignore you. The Fear and Greed newsletter is back. If you have not signed up to the Fear and Greed newsletter, head along to fearandgreed.com.au and pop your email address in. It comes out every Wednesday. It has got a bunch of good stuff in there. It's got kind of your take on all the big news stories of the week, so you get a bit of opinion and a bit more context.
And a bit of a change up with the newsletter. So this week, I talk about rates and Trump and stuff like that, but we also get a bit of a piece from Adam Lang, our colleague. Now, Adam, one of his roles is as a coach. And so we've decided to use that to provide some, useful information for small businesses and in terms of coaching. So I actually really like what Adam did this week.
Yeah, I do too. And it's worth checking out. So sign up if you haven't already, fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It is Wednesday, the 5th of February, 2025. Make sure you're following the podcast and join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, TikTok, and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.